So today's episode, we're sort of talking about the current state of injury management, and I guess it's that time of year where we're approaching the halfway point of the season, and a lot of athletes are quite sore, banged up, and if not injured. We've had a couple of people in the gym who are experiencing this and have consulted with physios around what training should look like for that week, so that they can, I guess, get up and play on the weekend. So, in your opinion, why do so many athletes re-injure themselves after being cleared?
The crux of it comes down to most athletes are trying to get cleared to play, but they're not ready to perform. And that comes off the back of pretty much not the fault of any particular person or profession, but just as a medical model, we're very clinic room based, which means a lot of rehab programs are low intensity, clinic based, designed for more pain relief, not necessarily for performance. As a result, athletes are getting cleared, but they're not really conditioned for either the really high intensity, high risk situations or the high volume, high fatiguing situations that happens when we're playing sport on a weekend. They haven't sprinted, they haven't decelerated, they haven't changed direction, maybe in weeks, but even if it's been an ankle injury for a week, how do they actually know if that ankle is ready until they run out and in that first contest? So then they go straight back into training, or worse, potentially straight into a game without having to experience those situations across the week.
I guess in your opinion, what should rehab kind of look like, that sort of return to play model?
Well, what if rehab actually prepared you for your sport, not just avoid what maybe causes you pain? So you can be building tissue capacity in the gym. So if you've had a ankle ligament sprain, we can actually help that ankle ligament get stronger by doing the right sort of exercises, as well as train function in around that area. So we look at our movement quality, whether that's squat pattern, a lunge, some sort of lateral bound movement. We can look at obviously our running mechanics work, and then they can start to look at the sports skill training in and around that, which that should be the layer. It should start with what's most easiest, into then more complex in the gym, then into field-based movements, so sprinting, jumping, changing direction. Then it should progress into sport drills, and then it should be the game. And if you don't tick all those things off, you shouldn't move to the next level.
So obviously that's kind of your line of thinking. It's probably the right line of thinking. So what made you rethink how to return to performance should actually work compared to, I guess, other professions?
Well, I think you look at the elite sport model, and that's how they do it. So there's a reason why. So if you look at most staff structures, and it will be a team effort, absolutely. You'll have like doctors with physios, they'll do a lot of the diagnosis, early management stuff. But very quickly we have rehab S&Cs, strength and power coaches, there's running speed coaches in there, and high performance managers that all then handle a lot of the on-field stuff. So if you go into an AFL club environment, how many treatment rooms do you reckon you'll find?
Probably a fair few.
Well, there's actually not many.
Oh, okay.
Because most of the treatment's done in the gym. It's on a strapping table. There'll be a room or two, but a lot of it is actually out in open space, because most rehab will happen either in the gym or out on the footy field, because they're doing running mechanics drills, they're doing change of direction drills, they'll be doing footy drills with their rehab professionals. It's not in the clinic room lying down. And that's the case even with long-term injuries. So if there's an injury and we hold back, there's obviously the element of the deload that happens. So pretty quickly the body gets worse, as well as the fact we've had an injury. We've got to now actually fix the reason why that injury occurred. It didn't just happen by chance. So now there's this whole complex kind of system. We've got to problem solve to get everything back. And what a 1 or 2 week ankle injury might only be 1 or 2 weeks. But for me, we see ACL 6 months later because of that ankle injury, because a lot of the deficits weren't addressed properly at the time.
So even touching on the deload there,
Yep.
most, I guess, return to performance looks like 50%, 60%, 70% sort of build up, and it's not really much intensity. So what's your kind of thoughts around the sprinting more of as a rehab tool instead of just like it being the last checkbox?
It's hard to build up your volume at the same time you're building your intensity. So if you're going to do half the session at 50 and then you're trying to do a bit more, but now you're at 60, 70%, then you're going to try and do the whole session and now you're up at 100%. It's hard to do both at the same time. So what I would rather happen is we find drills that you can do 100% for half an hour, then we find drills that you can do 100% for 40 minutes, and then 100% build up to your hour, and then you can integrate into the whole training. So this is where sprint drills come into it. So if you can't sprint, say for a hamstring injury, you can probably ankle dribble at day 3. The physio or whoever's probably told you, no, you can't run for a week, can't run for 2 weeks. So depends what you call running. Full steam sprinting, probably not. Absolutely, it's a bad idea. But ankle dribble, really low force, but we can start to integrate the right mechanics, start to fix some of the running mechanic issues that maybe cause your hamstring injury, as well as get a really light load into your hamstring to start strengthening it in the context of running. Why not? And then we can build into, so we can do some sub-max acceleration work because it's not high risk for hamstring. We can do that at day 3. Whereas most players won't start till week 1, week 2 post-injury, and then they'll try and jam it all in 1 week. Whereas our guys are already through 4 or 5 stages of progressions by week 2. They're almost chomping at the bit to play. Whereas in the other example, athletes haven't started their rehab yet.
And so walk us through that kind of framework that you have and that you use for our own athletes. So where do you start with an athlete coming off injury?
So obviously you're careful. You got to respect the injury and whether there's some structural or tissue change there. So worst case, we train everything we can around it so that we keep them in the environment, keep them in their routine. And where we can, we start to, some safe load in through that area. Because most things, stress encourages healing response as long as it obviously isn't overdone and creates more damage. So if we can get some movement happening, and then where possible, we start to add little bits of load, and that could just be body weight. It could be using an uninjured leg for most support, and we just only load 10-20% into the injured leg. But then we can start to get into sort of bilateral patterns and then into single leg. Then we can start to get into more of our explosive movements pretty quickly, depending on the injury. And then we want to start to integrate that into, like I said, our field-based movements so that they're sprinting, changing direction, accelerating really hard, and then they're pretty much ready to get into more that chaotic type situations that their sport would probably provide.
And so how do you know when someone is truly game ready and ready to return?
Yeah, I think obviously symptoms help, but I think we're so focused. We can make anyone better by just saying you've got a sore ankle, don't do anything. But obviously you're not prepared. But that people think they are because my ankle doesn't feel too bad. I might train tonight. And you might get through, but you might do a lot worse or you might hurt something else. So for us, we've got some different strength measures. We look at just the movement quality. So something, say, for an ankle, how do you do it, say, lateral squat on both sides? Often you'll see that they really favour one side. The ACL is a really common one. We see deficits even year, 2 years, even longer, 5 years post back playing sport. And you see that you can tell which side's the ACL side because they don't want to use that knee. So they'll compensate a bit more through the hip on one side, and then they're happy to load through the knee on the other side. So you'll just see a little show. So what we want to do is restore as much of that normal movement quality that we can. So we force plate testing, strength testing, and just probably an overall movement quality, as well as looking at their running mechanics.
We've touched on it throughout, but in terms of the intensity and the sprinting side of things, but why do you think traditional rehab sort of avoids the very things that athletes need the most?
One, it's the environment. Like I said, if it's done in a clinic room or just a makeshift sort of gym out the back, then they don't have the space. So it's not the same on the treadmill. We know that treadmill running is very different to field-based running. It's a nice way to assess some things because they're stationary and you can do some correcting, so it's not a waste of time. But in terms of, I still want to see them do other movements, see them run in the field, but also obviously you can't assess cutting, deceleration and stuff on a treadmill. And I think the skill set, like exercise progression, isn't taught to other professions as much as people think. That might sound crazy. And so if you're not living and breathing the gym environment, running mechanics, I don't do all that stuff because I think I have to. I do it because I enjoy that stuff and love it. And it's just nice that that sort of fits into, I think, what actually really matters. And that's why I'm drawn to it. If it was clinic-based rehab, I'd just go and do that. But I don't think it actually works. And that's my experience with my own body. And I see it over and over with our athletes.
And so if we're sort of to put a bow in it all and tie it all together, I guess how would you sort of sum it up in terms of what a return to performance really involves?
I think you've got to. So the mindset shift for me is you've got to get your Monday to Friday right, not just think that you can roll out on the weekend and it will happen. So if you can't get through a full week of your training, so say you do 2 gym, a speed session, you got 2 footy training nights, you can't go through and go, oh, I got through 50% of my footy, I haven't done any of my gym, or I've done 1 session there, haven't done sprint yet because it's too risky. That means you're not ready to play. 100% not ready. If you can't do your normal week and you can't do all those things with confidence, then you're not ready to play that weekend. Yep. The only time I would maybe make an exception is a big final or something like that, where you're like, I understand the risk and I'm still going to play anyway. To me, for kids in season, that makes no sense, risking their long-term health just to get back maybe a week earlier without any real kind of method to getting that injury sorted and then playing at a high level, performing at a high level. What we know is with injuries, the biggest risk factor for injury is previous injury. So why put yourself at risk going back a week early or 2 weeks early, whatever it is, without knowing you're 100% right, potentially blowing up that injury worse, and now you've got this thing you've got to manage for the rest of your career.
And so probably that sort of wraps it up, but I guess one last thing around, especially for youth athletes, in terms of it's a lot of short-term thinking. I've got to play this week. It's the most important game in the world, even though it's just another round. How can they shift, and how can parents even help them shift their mindset around to what's the long term? We've got 3 or 4 or 5 year window. How do we maximise that? We're not just trying to peak when we're 13, 14, but we're sort of 17, 18 and that window's starting to close.
I think you summed it up pretty well. I get that everyone wants to play, and that's why they do all the work during the week to play on the weekend. Let's just keep in mind that it's about long-term health. It's about actually teaching kids the right habits, that you don't just get to skip to the end step. There is a process to earn the right to play on weekends. So let's get all that ticked off first. Then, yep, you're right to go. There's anyone that's post-career, go back and try and tell me a junior game off the back of your head that was memorable. Most people aren't going to talk about that stuff. They're going to remember their last game. So there's no important game, especially for kids. So let's just make sure that, like I said, we're ticking things off, getting the process right, so that we're setting our kids up to really just enjoy sport. Like, it's end of the day, whether you want to get drafted or be a professional or get into the NBA, that stuff's great to have those goals, but the same thing happens when you're there. You still need to learn these skills. How do I manage this injury properly? Because if you get injured there, it's even more cutthroat. You get casted to the side pretty quickly if you can't get on top of it, can't get it all sorted. So some of our kids have come through, we've had some big rehab, I guess, cases to manage. People have come to us with things like ACL, and while they come in and they're pretty flat, you see that almost always the kids that have gone through it end up better because they've had to sit back, reflect and learn on the process and what it actually takes to go in to get their body right. So in the long term, they're actually a lot better off. The kids that don't give that a second thought, skip processes, stuff, just come unstuck. And if it's not now, it's just only a matter of when.